I want to thank all of you personally for watching these videos, but this is a very important video, and at the very end of this video I have a pretty hard-hitting message. And you know, if you don't want to watch the whole video, just skim through to the very last maybe 2 minutes of this, and I want you to think real long and hard about what's really going on in this world. And like I say, in the comment section, leave me a little something to let me know what you think about this. All right, get ready, here we go.
He authorized Sidney Gottlieb to spray germs into the fog in San Francisco Harbor. The point was to try to infect 800,000 people in San Francisco with this germ just to see how many would get sick.
Hello and good day. I did a video similar to this several months ago, and I want to recap and go back into it. I think it's a good thing to kind of just, maybe some people didn't get to see it, and I'm just going to do my best to try to entertain you and inform you at the same time when it comes to government operations that I can openly prove to the point where they've been declassified. It may even, you know, open some windows as to what they're doing in the skies up there and why some of us possibly could be so sick at times. So, thank you for watching and enjoy. What I have here is an easy find for anybody who wants to go behind me and check to see what I'm actually telling you. Because there are a lot of people who hate watch my videos, and they report me as some kind of, he's spreading misinformation. Ooh. Well, here you go. Here's your ever so beloved Wikipedia, which, by the way, can be somewhat shoddy at times, but I've double-checked a lot of this information, and I've also been around for a while. This is some of the things that I've been into for years. So the beginnings of the beginnings, and there's also proof that shows where some of the stuff was done on land as well. But let me go ahead and not get ahead of myself. The beginnings of the beginnings, let's go back farther than this, but this is where it started to be documented or declassified. But there was a thing called Operation Sea Spray, which was a 1950 U.S. naval secret biological warfare experiment in which Ceteria, Marsins, and Bacillus globalgi, bacteria that's really bad for you. Just lo and behold, really nasty stuff. Bacteria that it was sprayed over the San Francisco Bay Area in California in order to determine how vulnerable a city like San Francisco may be to a bioweapon attack. There has been speculations that the experiment may have contributed to possibly one person being here and alive, and at least 10 illnesses. Now, you got to remember, back in the 50s, nobody went to the doctor. Everybody just toughed it out, you know. You might have a big old FU bullet wound, you know. Get the bullet out, neighbor. And the neighbor would dig the bullet out, and they would just pack it full of gunpowder and rock and roll with it. So people were tough in the 50s. So just those reports alone was alarming that 10 people went. That must have been pretty bad. Military tests starting back in September 20th of 1950 and continuing until September 27th, the U.S. Navy released the 2 types of bacteria from a ship offshore of San Francisco based on results from monitoring equipment in 43 locations around the city. The Army determined that San Francisco had received enough of a dose for nearly all of the city's 800,000 residents. They were able to inhale at least 5,000 of the particles. This is within range of an infectivity for anthrax. Okay, so in October 11th, moving up a little bit, so September, now we're heading into October. We're almost, we're 20-something days into this now. 11 residents checked into Stanford Hospital near San Francisco with a very rare, serious urinary tract infections. And by the way, if you look into those, you can, you'll see it's pretty bad. And the doctors were bewildered by what they were seeing, by the way. They've never seen anything like this before. And the doctors, by the way, in the area were not informed that this was going to happen. So this was all a test through and through. Although 10 recovered, Edward J. Nevin, who had recent prostate surgery, was no longer with us 3 weeks later. Had a heart valve infection. The urinary tract outbreak was so unusual that the Stanford doctors wrote it up in a medical journal. Read this article. None of the other hospitals in the city reported similar cases And all 11 victims had these urinary tract infections following medical procedures, suggesting that the source of their infections was inside the hospital. If they would do this, and not, by the way, this test that they performed on the public was not nobody, not the president, not the people, not the officials in San Francisco, none of the citizens. The only people that knew about this were deep state operatives that had to deal with the CIA. I'll bring some of that out here in just a second. So, but and other weird stuff. So, by the way, the case of pneumonia in San Francisco also increased after Serratia, if I'm saying that right now, Marcians was released. Through a causal relation has not been conclusively established. In other words, that it spread from person to person. The bacterium was also combined with phenol, and an anthrax simulant that sprayed across the South Dorset by U.S. and U.K. military scientists as part of a dice trails. That was another experiment that ran from 1971 to 1975. There was no evidence that the Army had alerted health authorities. Before it blanketed the region with bacteria, doctors later wondered whether the experiment might be responsible for the heart valve infections around the same time, as well as the serious infections seen among intravenous drug users in the 60s and 70s. In 1977, the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Health Scientific Research held a series of hearings which the U.S. Army disclosed the existence of the test. Army officials noted that the pneumonia outbreak and the testimonies, but said that any link to their experiments was totally coincidental. The Army pointed out that no other hospitals reported similar outbreaks, and all 11 victims had urinary tract infections following medical procedures. So they pretty much were trying to say that this did happen, and information is a little skewed there. But suggestions that the source of their infections may lay inside the hospital. In 1981, Nevin's surviving family members filed lawsuits. Of course, they didn't win because of this. You don't. But the lower court ruled against them primarily because the bacteria used in the test was unproven to be responsible for Nevin's death. No longer with us. The Nevin's family agreed that the suit all the way up to the Supreme Court, which declined to overturn the lower court's thing. Similar biological warfare test. Between 1949 and 1969, open-air tests of biological agents were conducted 239 times. In 80 of those experiments, the Army said it used live bacteria in its researches at the time that were harmless, that were thought to be harmless, in others. So it used inert chemicals to simulate bacteria. Weird stuff. Just hear me out. Things, nozzles on buildings, nozzles in cars. And they did this a lot of times in low-income areas because those are the kind of people that are dirt to those people and they don't care about them. But they even, like in some of the articles I read, which we'll see here in a minute, some of these experiments were when people are walking through these fog of mists, they were trying to say it was to protect you from your mind being read during the Cold War by the Soviets. It's wild. But I'm going to read on. In the 1950s, Army researchers dispersed Serratia in the Panama City and Key West, Florida, with no known illness resulting. Like I said, in the 50s, people didn't go to the doctor back then. In the 1950s, Army researchers dispersed zinc cadmium sulfide, a known cancer-causing agent, over Minnesota and other Midwestern states to see how far they would spread in the atmosphere. These particles were detected more than 1,000 miles away in the New York state. Bacillus globulobanja, never shown to be harmful to people, was released in San Francisco, New York, Washington, D.C., and along the Pennsylvania Turnpike, among other places. In New York, military researchers in 1966 spread Bacillus subtilis, a variant also believed to be harmless in a subway system, by dropping light bulbs filled with bacteria onto tracks and stations in Midtown Manhattan. The bacteria was carried for miles throughout the subway system. Army's officials concluded in January 1968 report that similar covert attacks with pathogenic disease-causing agent during peak traffic periods could be expected to expose large numbers of people to infection by subsequent illness or no longer with us. Now, moving on a little bit. In 1965, a secret release of Bacillus globulobanja at Washington's National Airport in its Greyhound Line bus terminals. More than 130 passengers were exposed to the bacteria and traveled to 39 cities and 7 states in the 2 weeks following the mock attack. Uh, so, okay, all right. Now, I'm going to see here. Let's just move on just a minute. I'll show you real quick some of the things that were going on, especially. But these experiments haven't stopped. You can take that to the bank. These experiments have not stopped. There's a little something.
It was an Operation Sea Spray. They worked on a bioweapon. They came up with this bacteria that causes a very rare form of pneumonia. And Navy intelligence, which often works with the CIA, by the way, it's not just the CIA, they are very tight with military-industrial complex. So Navy intelligence and the CIA got on a ship and they had a great idea one day. Why don't we spray with the deadly bacteria entire San Francisco? And they picked the best day too. They know that if it's cloudy and if it's smog, it's even better. Bacteria sprays even more. So they dose the entire San Francisco with this deadly bacteria. 300 people got very sick, 12 died, 11 hospitalized.
The dose was...
See, now the numbers are a little different on Wikipedia. This is what I'm saying. And I did a video on this several months ago. And it looks to me, I need to go back and watch that video as I showed you it in live time. But I actually think that information has been modified since the last time I talked to you guys, because there was more information related to other states that were done the same way, where they used military ships off the East Coast. And from between the time I did that video, which a lot of people saw the live that I did, till now, it looks like they've actually modified some of that information on Wikipedia. And some of the intense fog.
He authorized Sidney Gottlieb to spray germs into the fog in San Francisco Harbor. The point was to try to infect 800,000 people in San Francisco with this germ, just to see how many would get sick. And they thought that the germ would sit heavily in the fog and would linger in the air longer that way to infect more people. Now,
which is very much true. Very, very much true. Going back to this.
Big enough to impact 800,000 residents, to inhale at least 5,000 of the particles.
Yep.
And they wanted to see what would happen. It's crazy that they would do that to anybody. But it's even crazier that with the way that they think they would do it in their own country.
CIA does not operate with the mindset. Many people in the CIA do, but those people are important. But CIA's idea on top is that there is no country. They are globalists. US is just another experimental pig, as France and Italy. They don't care. This is why they are so powerful. They don't care.
Yeah, so that's the real deal. And, you know, we see lingering clouds coming out of aircraft for whatever reason. I guess you can pretty much kind of understand that. And then, like I said, the recent lingering fogs that were reported back in late 2024 that sort of followed the drone stuff. Remember all the drone things that there was all these sightings of just massive drones just everywhere flying around like bees. And then a lot of people were reporting that they were having, respiratory issues. I know friends of mine that were just, not feeling very well. I was fine. It didn't affect me. I'm really good about cautious. I use supplements to help with my health, and I don't want to give medical advice. But all I'm saying is I just, I watch out for things like that. But there was just this immense fog, and I recall the air not really smelling something, Yeah, it's like, ugh. And so. By the way, that was never addressed, and all these people were like talking about this stuff. And I'll show you something else that's pretty interesting. Here, like I say, lefties hating watching this stuff here. This is from PBS, which has been defunded. But back when PBS was PBS, they actually did some reporting on things. But the start of the Cold War brought new foes and new fears for the officials running America's biological weapons programs, determined to anticipate possible Soviet attacks. This is what they used to say. By the way, let no crisis go to waste. Remember that now. Remember that. But Baldwin Camp Dietrich's scientific director during World War II left his position After the Allied victory in 1949 and returned to teaching at the University of Wisconsin, he continued to advise the government on issues concerning biological weapons, however, particularly the threat that might be posed by enemies, spies releasing biological agents in American cities. In an October 1948 report, Baldwin posted that the U.S. was particularly vulnerable to this type of attack. But in order to determine the precise nature of these vulnerabilities, secret field tests must have to be done to ascertain the vulnerability of targets to see what the potential and risk to be the enemy. So that they're trying to get ahead of this, according to those people. Now, the Army's Chemical Corps, which ran Camp Detrick, very famous place, by the way. I know Dr. Judy Makovitz gives a large whistleblowing about what really went on there. We all know what went on there, but what really goes on and went on there. But the secret field test would have to be done to ascertain the vulnerability of the targets of the potential interest in the Army's Corps. The Army's Chemical Corps, which ran Camp Detrick, agreed with Baldwin's assessment and set up a Special Operations Division at Camp Detrick to carry out these tests. Its first target was the Pentagon. Lefties, remember this. They used people at the Pentagon without their knowledge to see what they could achieve so far as infecting people with stuff. So you think you're working for the right side. You think that you're shilling for this establishmentarianism, disestablishmentarianism, by toting the line for these Democrats who... Fauci, your hero, your God, your savior. Peter Hotez, the next Duke Butt in line. In 1949, a Special Operations Division infiltrated the world's largest office building and sprayed bacteria into the Pentagon's air handling system, which then spread throughout the structure. The operatives moved to a larger scale testing and releasing clouds containing supposedly harmless bacteria from Navy ships off Norfolk, Virginia, which is not in the Wikipedia article that I talked about. And in April 1950, in San Francisco coast in 1950, the San Francisco experiments, of course, is what we know now, 800,000 residents, this, that, and the other. The success of the field test only increased demand for more experiments. Wow, almost like what they did with AIDS, allegedly. In response to an Air Force request in 1953, the Chemical Corps created the St. Joe program. And by the way, the other thing that recently was released was the pandemic that was made in UNC, North Carolina, then shipped to China allegedly to do whatever they did. But that's a whole other video altogether. Now, the bacteria is released from generators placed on top of cars. This is from PBS. And local government buildings. They were told that invisible smoke screens were being deployed to mask the city of enemy radar. I told you. The next stage was to increase dispersal patterns, dispensing particles from airplanes to find out how wide of an area they would affect. The first large area concept experiment in 1957 involved dispersing microorganisms over a swath from South Dakota to Minnesota. Monitoring revealed that some of these particles would eventually travel to 1,200 miles away. New York. Further tests covered areas from Ohio to Texas and Michigan and Kansas and all over the United States, basically. They just don't want to tell you, allegedly. But airports and subways, Ceterius, Marcius, Bacterius, open area testing continued in the 1960s this is what we're talking about with that whole thing, with the subways and the light bulbs that were dispersed out there. So whenever the subway train thing ran over these, it would disperse this stuff, get on the wheels of the thing and move all along every which way possible. Whether or not it was self-replicating is all known. Now, whatever happened to all that stuff, because some of the subways transverse into open air areas, as whatever, you've been on a subway, all of a sudden you're kind of out of the little tunnel for a second and back in, whatever. And then it rains, and that water washes down into the drainage system, which then goes into freshwater supplies 90% of the time, which then trickles down to supposedly well-run water treatment plants, as this bacteria totally doesn't manifest anything else or mutate as it's exposed to other chemicals along the way. That's all hearsay there, but just something to think about. So, basically, none of this... If you obviously don't think, if you think for 1 second that this stuff stopped, you're highly mistaken. It's even admitted in these court documents that I ran across that they were like, hey, you guys need to, put a stop to this stuff. And everybody's like, oh yeah, we're going to do that, maybe. We'll just cut it back. Better yet, we'll just make sure whoever told on us, we're going to Hulk Hogan side of them. Yeah, that's weird. Yeah, things happen, but a lot of weird stuff going on. And I just want, I hope that this, if you got time, share this video out and tell people. So many people are being ostracized for thinking outside of the box and just questioning what they see. But here I am bringing you articles just straight off the internet. Wikipedia, that's been scrubbed a little bit since the last time I did this video, but PBS still kind of holding on to a pretty good bit of their information. So you can go to that PBS article. I just searched government using vehicles and buildings to disperse bacteria. So then it popped up with the PBS article. So if you want to check behind me, please do. And then you can show these people to all your coworkers around the water cooler as you code switch to fit in with whatever demographics around you. And maybe they'll start to understand that not to be trusting, especially of hospitals. Are you guys at the Pentagon? What are they doing to you now with direct energy weapons? Are they? Do you think for 1 second that speaker that's mounted on the wall up there is not emitting some kind of sub-audible tone? Government buildings rigged with sub-audible tones to do things. That's all hearsay. But I'm just saying, if they'll do that, what else would they not do? It's a really interesting rabbit hole to get down. Light and sound, flickering lights. Think about this. Think about what they can do with just flickering lights at a frequency that's faster than what you can see with your eyes, but has some sort of mental effect, and then hitting you with sub-audible tones. I watched an episode of Wonder Woman where the guy who played the gay guy from Roseanne that helped him in the restaurant that they bought was a character in this one Wonder Woman episode where he was a famous musician and used a flute like the Pied Piper to subdue his audience and certain people who were susceptible to these tones to become his groupies. And then he'd select out of these groupies certain people that he wanted to facilitate more of his experimentations for mind control so that they could rob and steal money from promoters so that he could get all the money. And he used sight, light, sound as you were strapped to a chair, and it would cause mental conditions to be subdued. Look that up. And that was back in the 70s. If you made it through this whole video and you just watched me say that, please hit that like, subscribe, and don't forget to share this video out. And leave me a comment and tell me what you think about what I just brought to you guys. Thank you. Have a wonderful day and keep your eyes open.